A Passion for Mushrooms by Chrononautical. Chapter 25. As Poison is Drawn from a Wound. One could not mope forever. The whole point of the dwarven nonsense about giving someone a ring before telling them that you loved them was to avoid any unnecessary unpleasantness. Except Bilbo was not a dwarf, he was a hobbit, and he rather felt like a hobbit who had proposed and been rejected. In such a situation, the proper thing to do would be to stay away. Politeness demanded that the object of unwanted affections ought to have space to live unburdened by them. Bilbo, as a hobbit unlucky in love, wanted nothing more than to hole up in a small room until all the world went away. Unfortunately, the object of his affections was not a hobbit. Thorin was a dwarf, and a rejected dwarf pretended as though nothing of any import had happened. Thus Bilbo felt he ought to abide by dwarfish custom and act as if all was well, as though he had not offered Thorin a ring and his heart, as though both of those had not been refused. However, such pretense seemed much easier to decree than enact. Just getting out of bed, abandoning the only sunshine in this part of the mountain, was a struggle. Bilbo did not want to face a world where he no longer had any hope. Yet that was the world in which he lived, and it was not such a bad world at that. When he tapped lightly at the king's door, barely touching it, Thorin was there immediately. Obviously, the king had been waiting for his breakfast and was very pleased to receive it. He complimented every part of the relatively simple meal and drew conversation out of Bilbo like clarified butter from a pan. For his part, Bilbo did his best to smile and laugh and make a good morning of it. Admittedly, his success was limited, and he spent more time staring at his plate than actually eating.
Bilbo,
Thorin's voice was abruptly very serious.
You didn't fear it will be as it was before.
As he had clearly missed some part of the conversation in his distraction, Bilbo could only answer with a smile and a non-committal, I am not afraid. Thorin snorted and looked away.
I will prove it to you, you will see.
That did not sound good. Slightly alarmed, Bilbo probed for more information.
There is nothing that you must prove, Thorin. I think I know your character well enough by now.
Instantly, Thorin's eyes were on Bilbo's face, studying him intently. Blushing with shame, the hobbit looked away. Speaking so was not exactly pretending nothing had happened. He would have to do better. Still, when Thorin answered him, there was no reproach in his voice.
That you do. Far better than most. I am grateful.
The king paused.
I am grateful to have a friend such as you. No matter what comes to pass, I hope that we shall continue to eat breakfast together every day.
That is all I want. Tears sprang to Bilbo's eyes, threatening to fall. He was not nearly dwarfish enough to hold them in. Thorin's brow knit unhappily.
I have behaved badly,
he said. This wasn't true, though possibly by dwarven standards he wasn't supposed to reference Bilbo's failed proposal even so obliquely as he had. Still, Bilbo couldn't argue. He couldn't speak at all, because when he tried to shake his head, the tears began to fall. Thorin caught him. Thorin always caught him. It is a very strange thing to cry over a broken heart while being held in the strong, gentle arms of the one you love. To have the fellow you want most in the world stroke your hair and whisper apologies. To feel his beard on your forehead when he presses a gentle kiss to your head. Yet Bilbo found it soothing. If it meant that Thorin would still be there to comfort him as a dear friend, the hobbit could see a measure of wisdom in the dwarven custom of politely pretending that his pain had some other source. Indeed, as the days marched on, Thorin seemed determined to prove that he was the very best of friends. He made time to go riding with Bilbo, Theoden, and Tauriel twice. He was friendly with Theoden and perfectly polite to Tauriel. Moreover, he did not mock Bilbo's seat on Pebble the way the lasses did, only brought his own goat close so that the hobbit could try to mimic him. He joined Leah and Bilbo for luncheon on several occasions, bringing Phoebe along to help Leah overcome her natural reticence in front of royalty. He even walked with Bilbo to the mushroom mine many mornings, continuing their breakfast conversations. To work with black trilbies in his hands and Thorin's voice in his ears really was all Bilbo wanted. Mostly. If he spent his nights trying on the flower crown, stroking it gently and dreaming of wearing it at Thorin's side, that was nobody's business but his own. As the wide world continued on without much care for the broken heart of a mushroom farmer, Bilbo soon found that he was able to do the same. After all, it wasn't as though he had ever held out much hope of Thorin selecting a hobbit for the single love of his long life. or even a few nights of fun. In the end, he had only lost a delusional daydream. He still had the real Thorin in his life and at the breakfast table. That was far more than he deserved. Durin's day approached, and with it any number of good things. There was to be a great celebration, both of the Dwarven New Year and of the day upon which Thorin's company entered the mountain for the first time. At that occasion, the final treaty between Rohan and Erebor would be signed, a great statue of Bard would be erected in Dale by the dwarves in gratitude for his deed, and honors would be bestowed upon all who fought in the Battle of Five Armies. Bilbo thought he might also take the opportunity to plant his acorns somewhere close to the mountain. The end of autumn was the time to plant acorns, for they wanted a nice cold winter before sprouting. Leo was quite curious about the acorn and would not rest until she heard the whole story about how he carried it from Beorn's garden with the intention of planting it in his own as a memento. She pointed out quite correctly that Bilbo could not plant it in the mushroom mine, and simply dropping it on the mountainside did not seem fitting. Bard, upon overhearing one of their discussions, asked if Bilbo might not plant it in Dale, in lieu of the memorial statue, which quite embarrassed the king. Bilbo laughed at him, but thought that Dale was much too far. He wanted to plant his acorn in his home, and that was Erebor. So he asked Balin and Dis for their opinions, and they both suggested the creation of a little public garden on the slopes of the mountain near the front gate. Theodwyn thought such a garden would be pleasant for visitors to the mountain who might not enjoy spending all of their time underground, as dwarves did. Even Tauriel volunteered to help with the planting, though she had never been a very domestic sort of elf. Certainly everyone the hobbit spoke to was wholeheartedly supportive of the idea, but no one more so than Thorin. He leapt from the breakfast table, intending to go outside the mountain and help Bilbo see it on the moment planting the acorn was mentioned, only explaining that an acorn planted too early would risk rotting in the ground before the cold came, stayed Thorin. Even then the king questioned Bilbo intensely about what the little nut might need to sprout, and insisted upon surveying a likely place immediately. It was very kind of him. If the dwarf's solicitude came from an understanding that Bilbo wanted more of him than mushrooms and gardens, it was to his credit that he never once mentioned as much. His arm found its way across the hobbit's small shoulders as often as it ever had, and he did not shy away from giving Bilbo all the affection he could. For his part, Bilbo was pathetically grateful that his confession had not spoiled everything. He hurried to plot out the little walking garden on the southern slope of the mountain. Thorin deemed it the best place, and a dwarf did not change his mind. So, as Bilbo and Thorin found places for tulip bulbs, Balin found honors for visiting dignitaries, Bard found room for a statue he did not want, and Theodwyn found time to kill a lone cave troll wandering the eastern marches. All of them missed how troubled Tauriel was. Perhaps they would never have noticed if Dis had not teasingly suggested to Bilbo one day that they ought to go riding together. For you go often with Lady Theodwyn and the elf, but I do not think I have seen you astride your war goat since the day we met. After a little prodding, Bilbo agreed, but only if Theodwyn and Tauriel will come, for who knows when we shall see Rohan horses running again after Theodwyn goes home, and they are very beautiful. Allowing this, though with bad grace where Tauriel was concerned, Dis accompanied Bilbo to fetch Theodwyn from her chambers. Then, together, they went in search of Tauriel. Tauriel's chambers were not in the royal wing, not even the lower portion where many members of the company and Theodwyn were housed. Indeed, it was a bit of a walk to her quarters, but as they were on the way to the stables and the main gate, it was no trouble. They were also very easy to find, as there were guards in front of them day and night, for Tauriel's protection, of course. Once the guards informed her that Tauriel was within, Dis rather rudely entered without knocking. Although he was appalled by the lack of manners, Bilbo did not think any of them could have anticipated the reception they received. "Leave me!" Tauriel yelled, not looking up from the small writing desk over which she hunched. "Am I not to have even 1 moment of peace?" "You may have peace when you return to your own kingdom," Dis snarled. "While you are in my halls, I will have your respect." Spinning around, the elf looked at the great Tauriel down with wide eyes. Bilbo was astounded to see teardrops on her cheeks. At once her face formed the blank mask that Bilbo had seen her wear so often in front of Dis, and she laced her hands behind her back. "My apologies, Lady Dis. I thought it was the guard.
And that is all the courtesy you show to those tasked with the unpleasant duty of protecting you?
Dis stormed up into the desk.
What is it that you hide?
She asked, snatching a large paper from behind Tauriel's back. Then she stopped, staring at it. Knowing how rude it was, Bilbo crept up beside her to have a look. It was a painting, quite a good likeness, for all that Tauriel's face had never been mottled by such bruises, nor shown the same deathly pallor that it did in the painting. She was depicted in the nude, but that was almost incidental, for her abdomen had been ripped open, and her entrails were splashed across the page. It was very clear that this violence had been accomplished by a dwarven sword, which was still horrifically displayed between her legs, sheathed to the hilt in her dead body. It was the most awful thing Bilbo had ever seen, and beside him, Theodwyn turned to wrench into a flower pot. One corner of the painting had a title, "The Elvish Whore's Wedding Night," it said in clear, legible Western.
How came you by this? Dis asked softly.
I found it as you saw it upon the table there, Lady Dis. I beg your forgiveness for my rude behavior. I make no excuse, but it was only a few moments before you arrived that I discovered this gift. Your room is guarded! Bilbo was suddenly quite frightened for his friend. Someone who could draw such a portrait such as this was surely capable of greater violence. We must ask them at once, for surely they saw something. Tauriel looked at him inscrutably. I do not believe they know anything. They never have before when I questioned them about such gifts as are left in my chambers.
Bribery, Dis said. We will find out who did this and put a stop to it.
Then it was not you.
Bilbo felt very strange. Dis stared at him.
What?
You were not the one leaving hurtful, hateful messages for Tauriel in her bedchamber.
He did not quite know what it was he was feeling. It was not fear exactly, though he was dreadfully worried about Tauriel receiving threats, telling the guard, and still not being helped.
How can you ask that of me?
Easily. Oh! He was angry, furious, in fact, more so than he had ever been in his life. I have heard you refer to Tauriel in just such language as is written here. I saw you try to kill her with my own eyes, as did everyone else in Erebor. Clear that the gods know you would approve of this sort of thing, and that is why they ignore their duty, for you cannot think they would accept bribes to leave such presents in your own room.
Dis blinked. No, I cannot.
She looked at Tauriel, who was still standing stoically awaiting judgment. You are a princess! The people of Erebor take their lead from you. If you are going to go around making it clear that you would still rather see Tauriel dead than married to your son, then someone is going to try to have it done. Cheese and biscuits! What if they leave an adder next time? I do not fear for my life, Tauriel said abruptly.
No, Dis said again. Bilbo is correct. One who would do this would not hesitate to do you further injury. You have not spoken to Kili of this? Of course not. The two of you would be halfway to Mirkwood if he knew the danger you were in.
I fear no danger, Tauriel repeated placidly. Unspoken, she seemed to imply that she would much rather the dwarves in question challenge her to fight to the death, as Dis had. Dis smiled grimly.
You truly do not, do you? That is a quality to be admired in a daughter.
That broke Tauriel's stoic mind immediately. The elf's breath caught and her mouth fell open. My lady?
I will make it clear to the guards that this is unacceptable. Dwalin and Nori will root out whoever painted this awful thing. Do you have others?
Tauriel shook her head gently. I burned them.
Of course you do.
Dis rolled up the painting in a quick, business-like manner.
I regret we cannot burn this one until the culprit is found and publicly shamed. But you have my word that only Nori and expert he deems needed to track down the artist will set eyes upon it.
Tauriel took a deep breath. Thank you.
Thank me when I have results, Dis growled, and not before. Bilbo is right. This is my fault.
I do not blame you for the actions of others.
Nevertheless, the blame lies where it does. I regret, Master Burglar, that I will not have time to go riding with the three of you this afternoon, though I would take it as a kindness if you saw to it that my future daughter went anyway. A breath of fresh air might ease her troubled heart.
Without waiting for an answer, Dis stuck the painting under one arm, marched out of the room, and seized both guards by their ears. Apparently, they were too smart to protest overmuch, and they allowed her to drag them down the corridor. Bilbo laughed in surprise at the scene. Even Tauriel smiled a little, wiping away her tears with the hobbit's proffered handkerchief. Thereafter, Dis, Bilbo, and Theodwyn all took a more personal interest in making sure that Tauriel was well. If that meant that Bilbo spent more and more of his time in the Council of Lords, shouting down Thorin, son of Thorin, as he expounded upon the wickedness of elves, it was no great loss. He did not much miss the dull civic planning, and he was proud of Dis for the efforts she made to convince her brother and the public to accept Tauriel. Indeed, it surprised Bilbo a little that Thorin still held back his permission for Keeley to marry, but perhaps it was not so strange. More of the council took Doran's part than Bilbo's, and apparently a year was not a very long engagement by dwarven standards. Reluctantly, the hobbit decided that the marriage part of things was none of his business, so long as Tauriel was made safe from the apparently constant harassment. For the most part, Bilbo planned the little open-air garden with Thorin, tended his mushrooms, and spent time cooking with Leia. The romantic affairs of princes had nothing to do with hobbits, as Thorin had made clear when he declined Bilbo's courtship gift. Then Gandalf showed up, the great troublemaker.